All right. Thanks for being with us tonight. We've got a big show tonight. Dan Rather is here, which I'm very excited about. And we've got a few new pieces of information to break on what is going on in Washington with what appears to be now the mushrooming scandal around the president. We've got a few new exclusive pieces of information on that tonight. Last night, a Columbia Law School professor received what I'm sure was an unsettling letter from Congress. This is the letter. Dear Professor. The letter was addressed to Professor Daniel Richman at Columbia. He's a former federal prosecutor and now teaches at Columbia Law School. And yesterday in the Senate, the fired director of the FBI, James Comey, put the spotlight on Professor Daniel Richman when Comey told the world about his decision to make public his notes that he wrote up after this meeting that he had with the president, in which he says the president told him that the FBI should let go its ongoing criminal investigation into the Trump National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn. Director Comey explained yesterday under oath that the way he decided to publicize those notes, the way he decided to publicize that memo that he wrote about his interaction with the president, was that he gave it to his good friend who worked at Columbia Law School, and he gave his Columbia Law School professor friend the instruction that he should then pass on that memo to a reporter. And so after that testimony under oath yesterday from James Comey, last night, James Comey's professor friend at Columbia Law School, Professor Dan Richman, he got this letter from Congress, from the Senate, explaining that Director Comey had all but said that Professor Richman had in his possession this potentially incriminating memo about the president, and could Professor Richman please hand the memo over to Congress right now? And I mean it when I say right now. Quote, Mr. Comey's memoranda are relevant to the Judiciary Committee's ongoing investigative efforts. We ask that you provide the committee copies of all the memoranda you have received from Mr. Comey by no later than June 9th, 2017. Check your watch, check your wall calendar. It's June 9th, 2017, today. So quick turnaround, right? The Senate heard yesterday from James Comey that this professor at Columbia had Comey's memo about Trump supposedly trying to kibosh the FBI's Flynn investigation. They heard that yesterday, that the professor had that memo. They wrote to the professor last night telling him to hand it over, and they gave him a deadline. The deadline is today. Well, we can report tonight that as of 9 p.m. Eastern time, as of just a couple minutes ago, the professor at Columbia University, Dan Richman, has not turned over Comey's memo about his conversation with the president, which is interesting. CNN's Manu Raju, who's a great reporter at CNN, he further reports tonight that Professor Richman has actually been in touch with that committee as of tonight, but we can report that whether or not he's been in touch with them, he has not handed over the memo. Imagine this is kind of a stressful position for your average law professor to find himself in, right? But hey, it's turning out that these are stressful times. Now, there's obviously a lot going on in the news writ large right now. Kind of first and foremost, there's the UK election, which is fascinating and a total shocker and has implications that are huge for the UK and for Europe. Also has some interesting implications for us. There's the president's offer today that he would love to testify under oath. He'd love to be deposed by the special counsel investigating the Trump-Russia matter. Seems unlikely that he really wants to do that, but he said today he'd love to. There's also the matter of this ticking time bomb that is now potentially set to go off in the U.S. Senate when it comes to health care. The Senate may be moving toward a vote that would kick over 20 million Americans off of health insurance. So there is a lot going on. We're going to get to all of those things over the course of this hour. As I said, we've got Dan Rather here tonight. We've also got some expert legal advice coming up on the show tonight, advice that may surprise you. But there are, as I said, a few new things that we have been able to report out tonight that I want to let you know right off the bat. And the first is this news about this law professor who is thought to have a copy of James Comey's memo describing the president supposedly trying to shut down an ongoing FBI investigation. That law professor not turning over that memo to the Senate, despite the Senate telling him he had until today to hand it over. That obviously relates to the possibility of obstruction of justice, which is now this central question in terms of the fate of this presidency. Did the president try to stop ongoing FBI investigations? Now, the special counsel, Robert Mueller, he was appointed to look into the Russia issue, right? He was appointed to look into the specific question of whether the Trump campaign or any Trump associates helped or cooperated with the Russians in this Russian attack on our election last year. The order appointing Bob Mueller to be special counsel also said beyond that investigation, he could also investigate and prosecute any other matters that, quote, arise from that Russia investigation. Well, it now seems clear that one of the matters that has arisen from the Russia investigation is this possibility that there's been an attempt to obstruct justice in this matter, potentially by the President of the United States himself. And although the Mueller investigation, the spokesperson for Bob Mueller, is not confirming that overtly, is not confirming that Bob Mueller is now investigating whether the president obstructed justice, they're not saying so one way or the other, we're still pretty darn sure that that's part of what he's working on. And we're pretty darn sure of it tonight for two reasons. First reason is because James Comey said so under oath yesterday, twice.
Do you sense that the president was trying to obstruct justice or just seek for a way for Mike Flynn to save face, given he had already been fired?
Well, General Flynn at that point in time was in legal jeopardy. There was an open FBI criminal investigation of his statements in connection with the Russian contacts and the contacts themselves. And so that was my assessment at the time. I don't think it's for me to say whether the conversation I had with the president was an effort to obstruct. I took it as a very disturbing thing, very concerning, but that's a conclusion I'm sure the special counsel will work towards to try and understand what the intention was there and whether that's an offense.
Do you believe this will rise to the obstruction of justice?
I don't know. That's Bob Mueller's job to sort that out.
That's Bob Mueller's job to sort that out. The special counsel will work to try to understand whether the obstruction intent was there, whether that's an offense. So that's the first obvious reason we believe that the special counsel, Bob Mueller, is now investigating whether anyone, potentially including the president, might have tried to obstruct justice in the Russia investigation. First reason we think that is just bluntly because James Comey said so yesterday under oath twice. The other reason that we believe that the special counsel, Bob Mueller, is investigating whether there was an obstruction of justice is because of this.
So you didn't consider your memo or your sense of that conversation to be a government document. You considered it to be somehow your own personal document that you could share with the media as you wanted to?
Correct.
Through a friend?
I understood this to be my recollection recorded of my conversation with the president. As a private citizen, I felt free to share that. I thought it very important to get it out.
So were all of your memos that you recorded on classified or other documents, memos that might be yours as a private citizen?
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question.
Well, I think you said you'd use classified.
Oh, yeah, not the classified documents. Unclassified. I don't have any of them anymore, but I gave them to the special counsel.
I don't have any of them anymore. I gave them to the special counsel. So that means any notes, any memoranda that James Comey wrote about his interactions with President Trump, he has handed them over to the special counsel, Robert Mueller. And that's a simple thing, but it has a couple of really important implications. The first of which is, that may be what's complicating the issue of this poor law professor and this difficult night he's having tonight. The fact that Bob Mueller has these documents and may be using them in his investigation, that may be the complicating factor as to whether or not Jim Comey's friend, this law professor, can just simply hand over his copy of this memo to the Senate now that the Senate is demanding it. So that may be what's making this a hard night for that law professor. But the fact that James Comey gave all of his memos about his conversations with the president to the special counsel, that also implies pretty strongly that the special counsel is investigating potential obstruction of justice by the president. Because we know from James Comey's own testimony that he never talked to the president about Russia. He never talked to the president about the Russian attack on our election. James Comey said under oath that the president never brought that attack up, never expressed any concern about that Russian attack to him, ever, even once. So if Bob Mueller is only investigating the Russia attack and possible Trump campaign involvement in the Russia attack, well, these memos aren't about the Russia attack. If that's all he's investigating, there would be no reason for him to be reviewing Jim Comey's memos about his interactions with President Trump. The only reason the special counsel would need to have those memos is if he's investigating the possibility of something else besides the Russian attack.
Do you believe this will rise to obstruction of justice?
I don't know. That's Bob Mueller's job to sort that out.
Bob Mueller, the special counsel, as of tonight, appears very strongly to be investigating whether the President of the United States, Donald Trump, committed obstruction of justice. Now, the race is on to confirm that for a fact, but in the absence of direct confirmation, it really seems clear by every indication that that's what he's doing. So we've got James Comey saying under oath that President Trump was not the subject personally of a counterintelligence investigation by the FBI into the Russian attack on our election and possible collusion. President not personally the subject of that, but it appears that he very much may be the subject of the special counsel's investigation into the potential obstruction of justice. So here's the other thing going on about that tonight that is turning into a really interesting question. Bob Mueller appears to be investigating obstruction of justice. Is Congress investigating that too? We know the intelligence committees are investigating the Russia side of this, right? They're investigating the Russia attack, whether the Trump campaign colluded in the Russia attack. Just this week, Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, we know, handed over hundreds of pages to the House and Senate intelligence committees in response to their subpoenas. After initially saying he would take the fifth, now he's handed over hundreds of pages of documents. So the intelligence committees, we know, are looking at Russia. But is anybody in Congress looking into whether or not the White House tried to obstruct justice? Or otherwise illegally meddled with or tried to block any of the Russia investigations? Is that Bob Mueller alone, or is Congress working on that too? Well, as of tonight, we have a lot more information about that. As of tonight, it looks like the answer to that is possibly. The committees in Congress that would have jurisdiction over obstruction of justice by the president or obstruction of justice by other officials in the executive branch, the committees that would have jurisdiction over that would be the judiciary committees. Now, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House is Republican Congressman Bob Goodlatte. He appears to have no interest whatsoever in investigating this matter. He has certainly taken no steps to exercise his committee's oversight role on this at all. I should tell you, just as an aside, since President Trump has been in office, the only reason Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte has made any news at all is because he brewed up a little local controversy at home in Virginia when he got his speeding ticket amended, so they dinged him for a faulty speedometer instead of for going 69 in a school zone. Like, that's it. That's the only way he's made news. And he's got the committee in the House that would oversee something like an investigation into obstruction of justice. Now, a Democrat on his committee, Congressman Luis Gutierrez, wrote to Bob Goodlatte tonight and said, basically, hey, we're the Judiciary Committee. This is our turf. We should be investigating potential obstruction of justice now that these serious allegations have been levied against the president that he potentially obstructed justice. Let's have the president come in and testify under oath before our committee. But that's just a request to the chairman from one Democrat on his committee. So far, Chairman Goodlatte does not seem like he's going to do anything on this. On the Senate side, though, ding, ding, ding.
Comey said that this would be his only testimony tomorrow. Are you prepared to either issue a subpoena or try to get him before the Senate Judiciary Committee?
If under our laws, no, I shouldn't say our laws, under our rules on our committee, if Senator Feinstein would agree to subpoena, I would.
That's that good CNN reporter I mentioned before, Manu Raju from CNN. That's him today, basically door-stopping Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, who's the head of Judiciary in the Senate. And being questioned by Manu Raju, he says, yeah, if the top Democrat on my committee, if Dianne Feinstein, wants to issue subpoenas on this part of the investigation, let's say she wants to issue a subpoena to James Comey to get him to testify to us too, yes, we will do that. I will agree to that. Well, you know what? I think Senator Dianne Feinstein may, in fact, want to do something very much like that. And the reason I think that is because tonight she has just issued this. Quote, Mr. Chairman, in my capacity as ranking member, it is my strong recommendation that the Judiciary Committee investigate all issues that raise a question of obstruction of justice. These issues should be developed by our legal staff, presented to us, and be subject to full committee hearings. This is a letter from Dianne Feinstein to the chair of the Judiciary Committee tonight, to Chuck Grassley. In her letter, she summarizes James Comey's sworn testimony, these absolutely explosive allegations against the president, that the president pressured the FBI director to kibosh this active FBI criminal investigation into Mike Flynn. And of course, James Comey says the president pressured him on that. The president says, no, I didn't. The question is whether or not James Comey has anything to back up his story. We know he says he has a memo that he wrote right after he came out of that meeting. Of course, everybody and their mother is now trying to get a hold of that memo that Comey says he wrote right after that communication with the president, memorializing that discussion. But beyond that memo, which, you know, they're trying to pry out of this poor professor, and they're trying to pry out of Comey, and they're trying to pry away from Mueller, and they're trying to pry out of the FBI. Beyond that memo, tonight, Senator Dianne Feinstein takes it one step further, because James Comey says there's another way that his side of the story can be corroborated. Number one, he's swearing under oath. Number two, he says he's got a memo that he wrote that night explaining what happened. And number three, he says he told other people right then when it happened who can back him up. And we saw this coming last night, but now here it is. Quote, Director Comey testified that he spoke to a number of individuals about his conversation with the president shortly after it happened. According to his oral testimony, this included the following individuals. 1, Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. 2, Chief of Staff to the FBI Director, Jim Ribicki. 3, General Counsel of the FBI, James Baker. 4, Associate Deputy Director of the FBI, which is the number 3 person in the agency, David Bowditch. And number 5, Chief of the National Security Branch of the FBI, Carl Gaddis. Dianne Feinstein lists them all by name and tells Chuck Grassley, head of the Judiciary Committee, that the Judiciary Committee should hear from those witnesses, basically to see if they corroborate James Comey's testimony. So, regardless of the Russia attack and this huge, existential question of whether the Russians had American Confederates helping them in that attack. Separate issue, regardless of that. If the President of the United States is potentially in legal jeopardy for having tried to shut down an active FBI criminal investigation, we believe the Republican-controlled House, at least so far, is basically just going to let that go. It's not interested, at least not so far. The Republican-controlled Senate, however, may be showing signs of life, at least if the Democrats and the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee there, if Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Grassley continue to work together. And we know that, aside from Congress, we know that the special counsel is on that as well. He has the power to investigate. He has the power to prosecute. And on that, I think there's 3 things to take away on that tonight, which we have just learned, okay? On the matter of what appears to be now an ongoing investigation by the special counsel into the President of the United States and whether he obstructed justice. 3 things to take away. First, if the White House ultimately doesn't like what Robert Mueller, the special counsel, concludes about the president, we now know they are going to have a hard time smearing Robert Mueller, the way they're, for example, right now, smearing James Comey. They will have a hard time smearing Bob Mueller the same way, not just because of Bob Mueller's hard-earned reputation as a public servant. They will have a hard time smearing Bob Mueller if they ever try to in the future, because NPR reports tonight that the Trump White House actually went through the motions of maybe hiring Bob Mueller themselves. They considered hiring Bob Mueller when they were looking for a replacement FBI director after the president fired James Comey. So in the end, they may end up trying to smear Bob Mueller somewhere down the road. But you know what? It's a matter of record that they liked him well enough to interview him and consider him themselves for running the FBI. Second new thing to know about Bob Mueller and the possibility that he's now investigating the president for potential obstruction of justice. Second thing to know about that tonight that we can report, it concerns grand juries So far, we've known of at least one grand jury that is already involved in this case and that is issuing subpoenas. The first one we learned about is in Virginia. That's the grand jury that has been issuing subpoenas related to Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and his ties to foreign countries. So that investigation into Flynn operated through the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia. They have convened a grand jury. They have been issuing subpoenas and following an investigatory trail there. That investigation has already reportedly been folded into what Robert Mueller is doing at the FBI. In addition to that Flynn investigation, though, NBC News has reported that there is a separate federal investigation underway into Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. And I can tell you tonight that it is believed but not confirmed that investigation, the Manafort investigation, involves a second grand jury, separate and apart from the one convened in the Mike Flynn matter. So that Manafort investigation has also now reportedly been folded in to what Robert Mueller is doing as special counsel. So if you think about that for a second, right? If you think about what he's doing in Washington, what his remit is, and these other ongoing investigations involving U.S. attorneys' offices, involving grand juries, involving subpoenas already issued and investigations already underway, those being put under his managerial purview as he proceeds here. If you think about that, if the special counsel ends up wanting to issue subpoenas or bring criminal charges, it is possible that he could do that work. He could continue to work with either or both of those grand juries, which are already convened and working on some aspect of this issue. There's also a possibility that he could impanel a whole new grand jury. And that's not the kind of thing that is done in public. Grand juries operate in secret. But as the Flynn and Manafort cases show, as the history of lots of other high-profile cases show, the impaneling of a new grand jury and the grand jury getting to work in terms of reviewing evidence and issuing subpoenas, that is the sort of thing that is impossible to keep secret forever. And that brings us to the last thing to know about this tonight. It's this guy. In the Washington Post tonight, he is described by former Solicitor General Walter Dellinger as, quote, the most brilliant and most knowledgeable federal criminal lawyer in America, period. Wow. His name is Michael Dreeben. And today, National Law Journal confirms that Michael Dreeben is now part of the Robert Mueller investigation into the Trump-Russia affair and what now increasingly seems like the presidential obstruction of justice investigation that has arisen along with it. Top federal criminal lawyer in America, period. Gulp. Buckle up.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.